One, if you can't breathe through your nose in day-to-day life, like I used to not be able to do this, is I was always a mouth breather. And I deviated septum, went to a ENT, and they fixed that. I had polyps in here. They did a turbinate reduction, and that has made it so that I can breathe through my nose with my mouth closed. I still can't do it training at all. Like
Can you do it during sleep?
Sleep, yes, because I stay my mouth shut. So with the
that doesn't really answer my question, but
yeah, or else I would die. Yeah. So I have the CPAP on, and that comes through there. So that's like one part of it. The second part where I can't do it while I train is I have a whole bunch of mucus production while I train. And Brent, a doctor on the East Coast who is a pulmonary doctor, told me, like, you should talk to your ENT about ipratropium spray. This stuff is amazing. It's ipratropium.
Okay.
And I spray this in my nose before I work out. Yeah. And I still get some mucus production, but it's not to the level of like on the trainer, I will go through, without this spray, a 2-hour workout, literally like 40 Kleenexes. And it's a condition that happens. Yeah. And he had heard me talk about this in the podcast, and he told me to do this. And with this, it's probably, I'm only doing 25% of the Kleenexes. But even with this, while you're working out, you get so much mucus production that I can't breathe through my nose.
Yeah. Does it dry your nose out at all? No?
Nope.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, so and this is a common thing that you see, and we usually use something like, breathe through your nose sort of effort, and that usually like ties into like an easier effort.
Yeah.
But in the nature of cycling, we all end up opening up that huge intake vent that is our mouth at some point, and we end up bringing it in. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting because, as I understand it, Chad, at least, that the two are not exactly the same. It's not like just breathing through your nose.
Yeah, it's kind of contradictory. It's really thrown my world into topsy-turvy, and I've struggled with this, and I'm reading about it, and I talked that there are I mentioned that there are a couple books I was reading. I couldn't remember the author's name, so I didn't bring them up last week, so let me get that out of the way first.
Cool.
The Oxygen Advantage by Patrick, I'm guessing McKeown, McKeown,
maybe?
McKeown, I don't know how to say that. But anyway, it's an interesting read. And then What Doesn't Kill Us, super fun read by Scott Carney. He touches on a lot of the things, but he shifts more towards hyperventilation rather than anyway, that's worth reading too on a lot of levels.
Got it.
And then Brian McKenzie presented at the USAC Summit, something we will talk about a couple podcasts from now, but he is the author of a book called Power, Speed, and Endurance, and he talks a fair amount about breathing too, and he presented on breathing. I didn't catch that presentation, but I do have the slide deck, so I'm going to go through that and see if I can pick anything up.
Got it.
But anyway, what are the arguments against mouth breathing? This is kind of a popular topic of late, and I'm still, like I said, trying to wrap my head around it. A lot of it makes sense, but some of it is a bit challenging.
Got it.
So mouth breathing, the argument is that mouth breathing leads to overbreathing, basically hyperventilation, but now overbreathing is apparently the term of the moment.
Got it.
And all that is just more air than the body requires. And the result of this is that too much CO2 is removed from the lungs and the bloodstream. And what we need to keep in mind are the actual roles of CO2. I mean, first off, we know that, or maybe you do, maybe you don't, that the removal of CO2 is what stimulates breathing. As the CO2 accumulates in the bloodstream, this is what creates the need to exhale. What's perhaps more important, and maybe you didn't realize, and I didn't, not too well, is that CO2 helps offload oxygen from the blood to the cells. So if we have a CO2 shortage or an sensitivity to CO2, it's hard for the hemoglobin to actually release the oxygen, hard for the muscle to do sufficient or do work. It's not getting enough oxygen to do it. CO2 also plays a part in dilation of your airways and your blood vessels. So if those constrict, everything gets a little more difficult. Less air intake, less blood delivery, et cetera. And then, of course, CO2 regulates blood pH. So, anything that leads to muscle acidification is damning. It's not going to work well for us. So all this is to say that low levels of CO2 in the blood lead to lower performance. And the more we overbreathe, the more we have, reduced levels of CO2 in the blood.
And that's because when we breathe in a lot, our body can only uptake a certain amount of oxygen despite how much air we have in there. It can only uptake a certain amount. But then when we're exhaling, there's a chance where we're breathing in a bunch, pushing out a bunch, and we might be upsetting the balance
and it's
of CO2.
the distinction. There's a distinction between athletes and non-athletes. So they talk about overbreathing. That over time, it leads to a carbon dioxide sensitivity that we can't tolerate carbon dioxide, so we're discharging more frequently than we need to, and that has a performance or even just a health detriment.
Interesting.
Us as athletes, we actually spend a lot of time habituating ourselves, familiarizing ourselves, experiencing hypoxic situations. I mean, we breathe hard and we lower our blood oxygen saturation. We get used to existing in this low CO2 or high CO2 low oxygen state. So it's a little different for athletes, and this is again another thing I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
Interesting.
But supposedly this CO2 sensitivity is detrimental in a lot of aspects, and in addition to performance.
Interesting.
And then of course there's the dehydration. Breathe through your mouth, you dehydrate more. I don't think anybody really argues that.
Yeah,
it's moisture in the
we always think about like the way that we're getting becoming dehydrated is just through sweat. But man, you breathe out
you breathe out a lot of moisture.
So much
That's
moisture.
why cold weather. You think I don't need to hydrate in cold weather. Well, you actually do.
Yeah,
especially if you're breathing through your mouth.
Yep.
And then there's something termed carbon dioxide, nitric oxide rebreathing, and the composition of air is largely nitrogen. Only about 20% of it is actually oxygen, and apparently this takes place better in the nasal passages. And both nitrogen and nitric oxide and carbon dioxide are vasodilators. So the more the blood vessels and the vessels open up, the more oxygen we can deliver to the brain and the muscles. And then new topic, almost reluctant to bring it up, but there's a claim. Some of these products claim that when you breathe through your mouth, you only utilize your upper lungs, but when you breathe through your nose, you utilize your lower lungs.
Yeah.
I'm really struggling with that. It's like it's implying that you can't get full breath by breathing through your mouth. So that's a bit hokey. So some of this, I think there's plenty of good information to glean from this. Some of it though is clearly people pimping their wares, trying to convince you that their product is the best product.
It's really tricky.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you want to have that feeling that we're talking about, you've probably done it as a kid. If you breathe in and out a whole bunch right now when you're not doing anything, you get the dizzy feeling, right? And that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And you feel weak, and it's like, whoa, what's going on?
The sensitivity, and it's like a body oxygen level test you can do, just a breathing test. Nothing involved but you simply doing it. Is plenty of us fill our lungs and then we hold our breath until we have to take a breath. Well, we're flooding the system with oxygen rather than what I'm getting at is do that, except do it after clearing your lungs.
Yeah.
So fully exhale, clear the lungs. It doesn't have to be a strong exhale, just a gentle exhale. Clear your lungs as best you can, and then sit on that and wait for the panicky feeling to come. And it comes rather quickly.
Yeah, it does.
And supposedly, if it comes within inside of 10 seconds, you've got some work to do in terms of your CO2 sensitivity. And I can't last but 8 seconds before I get that reflex that it's basically terrifying, and my diaphragm starts to spasm. So according to these authors, that's performance inhibiting.
It makes me think of like free divers, those guys, like how they hold their breath for that long.
And that's where the that which does not kill us, or what doesn't kill us, Scott Carney author, takes it the other direction. He does the hyperventilation followed by the long breath holds and stuff. And it's all interesting stuff. How much it benefits our performance? Does it make us faster? Still working on that.
Exactly. This is the category where I'm like, more research needed. Yeah. Mike, breathe through your mouth. Don't worry about it.
And that's the other thing. You achieve a certain level of power output.
Yeah.
You're not getting all the air you need through your nose.
Good luck trying to get it through your nose. You're going to open your mouth.
Yeah,
it just happens.
You're going to pass out.
Now, the interesting thing is that there are companies that make products that say that, and they really pitch the fact that they say that when you breathe through your nose that you get basically in this end like a different quality of air, a different chemical response.
They say it very authoritatively too, very matter of fact.
And there is no.
And then they talk about studies being out there, but they won't cite those studies. Yeah. So it's kind of a hard pill to swallow.
So when you think about that, just know it's tricky. I know that like a lot of people say, breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth to calm down. I have no clue if there's science behind that. But the one thing I can say,
the deep breaths do activate the parasympathetic system. So so there is. I mean, that's just physiology. That does make sense.
Yep. But when you're riding your bike, I've actually seen people like directing people to just breathe through. Breathe through your nose as long as you can before you have to breathe through the mouth. And the fact is, there's no real science to back that up. So
I think too, a lot of it's the part of like how you are structured. Having
totally
2 surgeries, each surgery totally opening it up, like it's a whole other world.
Sure.
But you still don't.
Yeah,
breathe,
it's not just.
Still don't breathe through your nose in your workouts.
Yeah, well, it's because too I have that high mucus production, so I would suffocate.
Well, that's it. All of this is contingent on the fact that you can actually breathe through your nose if you want to.
Yeah.
Nate doesn't really matter. He wants to. He'll suffocate.
And the point I'm getting at is, let's say that you didn't have that problem, you would still be breathing through your mouth in your workouts because you're working hard, and that's
exactly
just
at
what
a certain
happens,
level. You have to. I don't.
You have to.
Yeah. So again,
it's an interesting point.